organization. Before we start, we can have a moment of silence for former Francestown Commissioner Guy Tolman. Anyone new guy and wants to say anything?
Well, we can say on the staff side that we very much appreciated Guy. He was involved in a whole variety of ways for Francestown. He was a dedicated commissioner and dedicated to Francestown, just like all of you. And very thoughtful, very interesting, and we will miss him. So, yeah. Anything else, Nate?
No, I think all of us on the staff really enjoyed working with Guy. You may remember he always sat in that corner. He was amongst the first to be here at every meeting. He really enjoyed not only participating in the meetings, but I think getting to know all of you. He was often the first here and amongst the last to leave. He really enjoyed his time as a commissioner. We really enjoyed him.
Thanks, Nate.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, so we're going to move to authorize the Metropolitan Planning Organization of the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission and the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission to allow one or more members of those bodies to participate in the August 24th, 2021 meeting by electronic means of communication, subject to provisions of RSA 91-A23. This would include any member of the public body attending virtually to articulate for the minutes why they are virtually and identify other persons present in the location from which the member is participating. Further, that each part of the meeting must be audible and discernible to the public at the location of the meeting, and all votes of the public body be taken by roll call vote. Motion to authorize.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
So, Linda, did you see that? Yeah. Okay, so we had Peter made the motion and Al Hall seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Suspensions?
So just to be clear for our virtual audience, the vote was to allow you all who are participating virtually, our commissioners, to vote on anything that we pass. So that has been done.
Great. First action is the meeting minutes of July 27th, 2021.
We need to do roll call with that.
Right.
So Al moved the minute
I'll second.
and Peter Griffin seconded. So I'll go through the roll call. I'll do that by community. It's a little bit easier and ahead of time if I'm missing one. So please just come in as we go through each community. So from Auburn, we have Paula Martel.
Yes.
Paula. Bedford, in the room, we have Bill DeShaco.
Here.
And virtually, we have Barbara Salvatore. So we
Yes.
Thank you, Barbara. And anyone else from Bedford I may have missed?
Yes.
Bill Jean.
Present.
Bill, sorry, back there. He snuck in. Candia, we have Al. Chester, we have Andrew Haddock.
Aye.
Aye, thank you, and he's present. And Deb Munson is virtually.
Yes.
Thanks, Deb. Deerfield, we have Bob Cody.
Present.
Okay, and I on the minutes.
Pass. Abstain.
Abstain on the minutes, thank you. Anyone on our virtual? I don't think I saw Fred. All right, Barry, and in the room, Jeff Bolton.
Here and yes.
And yes, and virtually, Oh, and we have Richard Tripp here.
Hi.
Thank you. And John O'Connor, we have virtually.
Here and yes.
Thank you, John. Francestown, virtually, we have Alfred Eisenberg. Alfred, did we lose you? I see you. You have to unmute yourself. May have stepped away. From Goffstown room, we have David Pierce.
Here, yes.
Thank you, David. I know Barbara and Joanne are both excused from Hooksett. I don't believe we saw any. Cutler is not present or virtually. Londonderry present. We have Suzanne Brunel. Thanks, Suzanne. And Deborah Levin,
Yes.
Julie, and Martin.
I abstain.
Martin. From Manchester, we have in the room Peter Capano.
President, yes.
Sylvia, Art from Londonderry is present virtually, and yes.
Thank you, Art.
You're welcome.
Sylvia, Brian Battaglia from Londonderry is here as well, yes.
Okay, wow, you guys are online. All right, thanks, Brian. All right, so, and Suzanne was the one who gave me the hint. So she's here, Brian is here, and yes, Deb Levins.
I thought I already said yes. Present, yes.
Thank you, and Arthur Rugg and Martin Shrew. Oh, this is who we've been through, sorry. Manchester. Now Peter Capano. Yeah, we were
Present,
already-
yes.
You're still here. All right, thanks for hanging in.
I haven't changed my mind yet.
Oh, my God. Ray Clement, are you on? I don't think so. And Dan O'Neill is excused. New Boston in the room to my right is Mark Sunan.
Here and abstain on the minutes.
Thank you. And I don't think I saw David. No. No, I don't think we saw anyone from where. And from Wyndham in the room, we have Peter Griffin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter. And John Hiltz is virtual.
Present and yes.
Thanks, John. And then from the MPO, we have Lucy St. John.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, whatever it is right now. Can you hear me?
Right. No problem. You squeeze in on the good morning, not a problem. I'm also seeing that we have several friends from DOT. We have Bill Watson.
Good morning.
And hi, Bill. We have Mike Dugas.
Yes, hello, Sylvia.
Hi. And let's see. If other guests as well. Non-voting MPO member, we have Tim White.
Yes, good morning.
And then we have some other guests. Thanks for coming today. I think that's it from me.
All right.
Dean, yes, we have Dean. Thanks, Dean, for being here.
Next item is the fiscal year 2023, 20 to 32, 10-year transportation improvement plan.
So, Mike,
Nate just ran out the door. I'm not sure. Or he's
okay.
fine.
Well, we have, I know, Mike Dugas, which are you going to do the 10-year plan or a different one?
I am
Sylvia?
not. I'm here for the target setting discussion.
Okay, so that's Lucy.
So Sylvia, it's me. I'm in the conference room here, so I can share my screen. Are you ready?
Not quite. I'm going to make you a co-host.
Okay.
All right, now you can share your screen. Do the same.
Okay. Can everybody see that?
No,
Pardon?
we don't see anything yet.
Okay, let me try something. Did you hit share screen? Yep, we just share screen. 1 second here. Let's go back to, it was up a second ago here.
Hey, Sylvia, sorry for the interruption. Did you mention Francestown during the roll call? I had some audio issues at the beginning.
All right, there's that.
I'm not sure, Al, was that you who were talking? I could not hear you.
Oh, yes, this is Alfred Eisenberg from Francestown. So,
Can you hear? We can't understand what you're saying. Can you put it either in the chat? I don't know if you have a question, Al, or just speak right up to your microphone. No, I hear nothing. And Lucy, I'm not seeing any shared screen yet.
Let me try this.
Technical difficulties. Sorry, everyone. I'm sure this can get resolved.
I'm not, let me try something else here. I'm sharing the screen. And,
Sorry, Sylvia, I think I got my audio hooked up now. This is Alf from Francestown, and I was just wondering if you called out Francestown during the roll call.
I did, and you had stepped away, so if you want
Okay.
to, yeah. So acknowledge you're here, and
Yes.
also if you wanted to make, I say yes to the minutes, or,
Yes.
okay, great, thanks, Al, appreciate it. So Lucy, maybe while you're, oh yeah, there it goes, we're seeing something now.
all right, well, thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I don't know what all righty. So I'm going to do just a quick overview of the first GASSET meeting and just give just an overview of that process. So if you can't hear me, just let me know. But GASSET is the Governor's Advisory Council on Intermodal Transportation. It includes the 5 executive counselors and the Commissioner of DOT. There was a meeting on July 16th, which was the kickoff meeting for the draft 2023-2032 10-year plan. So what I'm going to give that presentation that day, the meeting was, an hour and a half to 2 hours long. So I only have about 10 to 15 slides to present today. And I'm going to provide a general overview of that meeting, very high level discussion of that. So general overview is regarding obviously federal funding. The FAST Act reauthorization expires at the end of September 21st of this year. As we're all aware with COVID, there's been changes in people's travel patterns and stuff. In terms of constraint, last 10-year plan was based on the $183 million. If you've been following all the news, there's a lot of discussion at the federal level regarding the different various aspects of the new federal transportation legislation. So that as I said, I'm just trying to give a general overview at this point. And just so you know, the GASSET presentation, the full presentation, which is multiple pages long, is available on the DOT website should you want to go back and look at more detail. In that presentation on the 16th, there were a lot of detailed slides regarding funding levels and color of money and all sorts of elements of this whole discussion at a much more refined level. But this is just a general overview once again. In terms of federal funding, once again, there's the uncertainty as of right now what amount of money we're going to get. Obviously it covers everything from multimodal to freight to highway to vehicle safety, the typical things that we think of. Then there's the discussions on transit and FTA, and then just the whole, as I said, there's a lot still being discussed at the federal level. And once we hear more, we can certainly let people know as well. From a state perspective, as you were aware, when COVID first hit there was certainly a reduction in the traffic volumes, which obviously we collect tolls, and that money is used to improve the turnpike system. And corresponding to reduction in tolls, there was also a reduction in gas tax, and that money is used for improvements to the transportation system. So overall, with the reduction in revenues in that, there has to be some modifications and changes to where we spend our money and knowing where we're going to get money, how we spend into the future. So the general, basically, several of the capital projects of the turnpike system will be delayed. or postponed or moved out a little bit, and I will get into that in a little bit more detail. State impacts, the budget, federal stimulus money. Money was added, 5 million in general funds was added to the betterment and calendar year 2022. And then the potential ARP, which is the American Rescue Plan, with potential to receive dollars for that would be to offset the losses from the turnpike revenue. General, I'm just going to go over several of the key programs. One of the things we anticipate this year during the 10-year plan process, because in the last 10-year plan process, there was a lot of interest in active transportation. And what active, and you're very familiar with the TAC and the policy has discussed this on multiple times, is, the active transportation includes opportunities for complete streets, multiple use paths, pedestrian use, sidewalks, expanded shoulders. So there's certainly funding in this next 10-year plan, and that will be discussed in more detail as we go out for the public hearings. But that is still a component of the 10-year plan process and will continue. Airport funding. One of the things stressed during the last GASIT meetings of the last round and this one is that certain pots of funding can only be used for certain types of uses. For example, airport funding cannot be transferred to other uses. In the 10-year plan, there was a total of $289 million, and I'm not going to read all the details that you're seeing up there, but on average, it was $28.9 million per year. The funding is for primarily the federal aviation, which is the Federal Aviation Administration, commonly referred to as FAA. The funding is restricted for, obviously certain things: planning, studies, preservation, modernization, or expansion of eligible airports. And in the more detailed plan, there's a map showing what are eligible airports and what aren't eligible airports. And then the types of funding and how much is basically, some of the programs are 80-20, some are 90-10, some are 95, and then 95, and then 5% local. So depending on the federal program, there are different requirements in terms of match and local funds and state funds. Transit funding, once again, this is another subject which we've heard a lot of interest in. And so in the 10-year plan, there's a total of $312 million with an average of $31.2 million per year. The funding from this is primarily the FTA, which stands for the Federal Transit Administration. And similar to the airports, the funding is restricted for for transit services, and it cannot be used for other uses. And the transit funding includes a capital corridor project development phase. And once again, there are several maps in the more detailed presentation, which is available on the DOT website. This is just a general map showing the transit services in New Hampshire. Rail funding, once again, it's a transportation plan, so it includes the various modes. How much money is in there is a 10.6, average 1.1 million over the years. There's the special airport, special railroad funding, which comes from lease agreements with the private rail providers. These funds, just like the airport and the other ones, cannot be transferred to other uses. There's also the Railroad Revolving Loan Fund, which is 1.5 million every 3 years, and that is used for capital work on the different classes of railroads, Class 3 and railroad. Funding eligibility, this is a map in it, and as I said, there's several more detailed maps, but there's maps on classifications of roads, and certain roads are available to use federal aid or federal money. Some roads you can't use federal money on. Shows the number of miles of federal aid eligible road, which is approximately 3/4. I didn't do the math exactly here, and then non-federal aid eligible roads. State aid bridge. This is a program that provides state funds to municipalities for bridges, and I know most of the municipalities are familiar with this process, where there's, basically they apply for it, and then based on there's a bridge inspection process, which all of that is looked at when you're applying for state aid bridge. There's a whole list of the number of bridges there's 113 currently enrolled through 2029. 65 of them are red list bridges. Based on information about the various bridges over the years, the average cost per municipal bridge is about 1.4 million. They're considering using federal off-system bridges to offset the money from the Senate Bill 367. which was the 4.5 cent gas tax, and there's an expectation for a solicitation of new projects for the later years of the 10-year plan. There's an annual report which is provided to the governor and council on the status of the state aid bridge program. Once again, this goes back to one of the previous slides, which talks about the TAP program, which discussed using this for non-motorized projects and everything from rail trails, sidewalk, off-road trails, abandoned rail corridors, and non-motorized forms of transportation. You're all very familiar. There was a solicitation round. Obviously, there were more projects than amount of funding, but there's 34 applications were received requesting $25.1 million. DOT evaluated all the projects, and the final list will be approved by the commissioner, included in the draft, and will be included in the draft 10-year plan, which will be presented to GASIT for their review and adoption. So the TAP projects are included in the 10-year plan process. Every couple of years when we do the 10-year plan, there's various, obviously, how do we move forward with what assumptions do we make? So the proposed strategies for the 10-year plan, assuming that there's going to be some additional authorization of funds, anticipating up to maybe 22% higher. The recommended constraint, as you're aware, when we do the 10-year plan and other elements of the transportation planning process, we have to be sure that we're fiscally constrained. We can't say, oh, we want all these different things. We got to be sure that we have the money that can be used for the various types of projects. And so the 10-year plan is fiscally constrained, as similar to the TIP and the other programs that you're familiar with during your review as the MPO. The constraint at this point is being based on the $230 million, and then level funding for the outer years of $237 million. The strategies as proposed will be as we've done in the past, to accelerate existing projects which are in the 10-year plan where possible. Obviously, that process, to move things forward because they're in there and keep things moving along. Fully fund existing 10-year plan projects. Some of the projects aren't necessarily fully funded as they get more information or elements of the project are developed through time, and they to fund those projects. Modify existing programs to improve projected conditions in the outer years, and then consider new projects in the outer years to improve safety and capacity. And then one of the other strategies here is the Garvey bonding, is to use that money to basically convert to federal funds for some of the projects that are specifically listed there. Once again, as we talked about at the very beginning here, with the reduced toll revenues and the reduced amount of vehicles on the road and all of that, and which the gas tax that is generated, the proposed strategy is to delay the Turnpike capital projects, specifically the Manchester's exit 6 and 7, delayed start 3 years from 24 to 27, and the Bow Concord delayed that additional from 26 to 28. Constrained state-funded programs to current projected revenues. Once again, nobody knows, I should say nobody knows, that wasn't the best word to use there, but we have to, constrain what we're going to spend based on what we anticipate the revenues to be. If that were to change, then that could be modified as well. Maintain and extend all programs out for 2 years, further in the 10-year plan, and then utilize off-system bridges to offset the Senate Bill 367, which was basically the reduction in the monies that go out for municipal bridges and that. The next GASIT meeting is scheduled at this point for September 2nd. Details regarding the time and all of that will be released in the near future here. The agenda for that meeting, obviously that's a public meeting, the agenda would be to provide additional information to the counselors, the executive counselors who are part of GASIT, present the 10-year plan outcome, review the logistics and the contents for the fall hearings. As you're aware, the counselors get to decide where they want the hearings in their region, and that varies from from 1 to 2 to whatever the different counselors they want to have. Review of the virtual public involvement survey. During the last 10-year plan, there was a public survey which generated a lot of input, and I believe there was around 1,200 responses to that. various questions on the system, what people want, what they like, what they think needs to be improved. And then just for the discussion of additional items regarding the whole gas process. The whole gas process, which will be beginning sometime in mid-September here. So that is a quick and general overview. As I said, the meeting that was on the 16th was a couple hours long. There was very much more detailed information and the whole presentation with, as I said, the background maps showing, you know, changes in the red list bridges, improvements, you know, how funding has changed and how different, you know, the number of bridges that are put on, the number of bridges off, and road conditions, everything showing from fair conditions to good conditions. Just more details about the actual infrastructure itself is included in that presentation. So that is it. Pardon? Go ahead.
If I can just interrupt real quick, this is
Sure.
Sylvia. So you mentioned the next meeting, on the slide, it says September 1, but you said September 2nd.
Oh, I'm sorry if I said that. That's my oversight. Forgive me. It's September 1st.
Okay, great.
So if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer those or try to answer those. Or as I said, if you want more detailed information, the whole presentation is on the website. And as I said, the upcoming meetings where additional information will be presented to the counselors. And as we move forward through the process of the fall, to have the public hearings and the input from all around the state, all of those things are taken into consideration in as part of the 10-year plan process.
All right, we have a question here in the room.
Hello, Lucy. This is Peter Griffin from Windham. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Peter. Yep.
Lucy, it was my understanding that the exit 4A was being delayed a couple of years, but then it's also my understanding that there was a bill filed by a senator to mandate that the DOT build the exit. Do you know how that has played out and how will that affect the planning for the next 10 years?
So your question is, the exit 4A, you heard that it was delayed, and I didn't understand the part about the mandate. What did you?
There was it's my understanding there was a bill filed by Senator Regina Birdsell to mandate that the DOT build the exit 4A. And if I have my correct information, I really want someone to set me straight.
I will have to get back with you on that unless Bill Watson, if he's in the meeting. I don't know, Bill, did you want to respond to that? I don't know enough of the details of that to provide a response at this time, but I'm happy to look into that and get back with you.
Yeah, good. If I may, good morning, Peter.
Hello, Bill.
Let me turn my camera on so anybody can see me if they want to. So do you know, so I'm not familiar with Senator Birdsell's language. Was that last session or is that something that's coming for this upcoming session? Do you know?
I don't know. I was just an article I had read in one of the papers. I don't know if John O'Connor, who's the state rep from Derry, can comment on it, or he may have more information.
Because I think what I can say is what we anticipate is that there was the department had gone through the design build process for exit 4A and the costs had come in extraordinarily high. And it took us some time to work through the issues to try to figure out how to approach it from more of a traditional design bid build process. I think that what we're going to see in the draft 10-year plan is that construction is going to be scheduled within the first 2 or 3 years of the 10-year plan. That the project is still going to be moving forward. It's just going to be in a more traditional sense. So design is still moving forward, permitting is still moving forward, design plans are still moving forward.
I think the project's been broken into 3 parts, Peter, too, so that they can space the funding out. I don't know the details.
Yeah, the funding has been split. What we've seen internally yet, and the draft document has not been finalized, so I speak everything in very draft terms, but the draft document has construction funding spread over, it looks like 3 different construction contracts over 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Wouldn't that still spread out? I think that was Peter's
previous question, if it's being delayed for the first part of the 10-year plan, wouldn't that move out of the current schedule? Or does the cost overrun already?
I don't know. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, thanks.
Stop sharing.
Yeah, you can stop sharing. Thank
Yep.
you.
All right, Nate, you're up for state highway safety performance targets.
I may be listed on that, but I will not be your presenter today. We're fortunate to have our colleague Mike Dukas, who is the state highway safety engineer. And Sylvia, if you could make Mike a co-host.
I already did that.
Okay,
So Mike-
perfect. So yes, Mike will give an overview about the recently the current state highway safety targets and kind of the trends for highway safety in New Hampshire and what's driving those trends. And I will at this point yield the floor to Mike.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Sylvia. How is my audio? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, it's good.
And you can see my screen too, I presume.
Yes.
Wonderful. Good start. Okay, thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Mike Dugas. I'm the highway safety engineer for the New Hampshire DOT. And my critical function or responsibility as the highway safety engineer is to manage our highway safety improvement program. And what the HSIP is, it's the $10 million roughly of federal funds that the DOT receives every year for implementing infrastructure safety improvements. And so what I'll be talking today about is one element of our HSIP, which is a requirement that we establish performance measures and safety targets. I'll talk about why we have those, the sources of data that I use when I'm assembling and measuring the performance of our program. I'll talk about the methodology that we use in setting safety targets. I'll show what we have developed for the safety targets for next year. So every year when we create targets, we're creating them for the subsequent calendar year. And then finally, I'll talk about the different parties that participate in that target setting process. So to begin, I won't read this entire slide. There's a lot of detail here. But first of all, to talk about why we have performance measures and safety targets, really both the Department of Transportation and the Department of Safety are required by federal law to set targets for specific performance measures for their safety programs. But I think at a more basic level, we really need performance measures and targets so that we can gauge how effective our safety program is and where we need to focus our efforts. And so while the federal government dictates that we have performance measures and safety targets, they don't tell us how to do it. And so as you look across the country at the various states, there's a wide variety of processes and programs in place for setting targets. Some states that have the resources, some of them are very heavily analytical and data-driven in their target setting, using census data, using zoning maps and development trends and things like that to have a really highly analytical target setting process, while other states with lesser means use a more subjective and what I would call a naive process. And looking again at those states, some of the targets that states choose to set are very aspirational and aggressive, while other states have more easily achievable target values. Speaking for New Hampshire specifically, because in New Hampshire we rely entirely on our federal safety funds for our safety program, and those funds have been stable over the years, we tend to base our targets largely on the past performance. So the performance measures that we're required to report upon are these 5 here, both the number and rate of fatalities. And when I'm talking about these types of different crashes of different severities, we're reporting these for the entire public road network, not only state highways. So this is for the entire state of New Hampshire. So we report performance measures on number and rate of fatalities, number and rate of serious injuries, and then the number of non-motorized fatal and serious injuries. And the first three measures that are shown on this list are shown in bold because these performance measures are common both to the Federal Highway Administration, so the DOT reports these, and National Highway Traffic Safety Administration requires them as well. So they are reported by the Department of Safety. Because ultimately both of our state departments are reporting up the food chain to the US DOT, our common performance measures on these first three measures have to match precisely. And so we work very closely when we're putting this information together. So ultimately, the upshot of these performance measures is that each year the DOT and the Department of Safety report in our annual reports how we have performed in relation to these performance measures. And in order to achieve, I guess, success in these performance measures, we're required to either meet the targets that we have set, so the actual performance meets or betters the target that has been set for that year, or make significant progress toward meeting that target. And by significant progress, what the federal government means is that you may not have met your target, but your performance has improved versus the prior reporting period. So you're showing at least a positive trend in your performance. If we can meet one of these two conditions in at least 4 of these 5 performance measures that I just showed to you, we have met the performance measure for our safety program. If we don't meet at least 4 of these 5, there are penalties for the DOT, a little bit different for the Department of Safety. But for the DOT, we lose the ability to flex our safety funds out of safety projects into other areas of the federal program. New Hampshire DOT historically hasn't flexed our funds out of safety, but we would lose that flexibility if we were doing that. A second requirement or penalty if we don't meet our performance measures is that we have to produce what's known as an implementation plan. Basically, a plan of action that shows how you will improve the performance of your safety program so that you can, in future years, meet those performance measures. So the data sources that we use are varied for reporting on fatal and serious injury crashes for both motorized and non-motorized users. So for the number of fatalities, we rely on data that's provided by the Division of Motor Vehicles. The FARS coordinator. FARS means the Fatal Accident Recording System, and that is a federal database of all fatal crashes. And so that is the source that we use for data on New Hampshire fatal crashes. For rates of fatal crashes and rates of serious injuries, we need a figure for traffic volumes. And for that, we use vehicle miles traveled figures. And these are calculated and collected by the DOT every year as a requirement of other federal laws. And so that data is in hand, and that we use that for calculating fatal and serious injury crash rates. And then finally, for the number of serious injuries, we rely on the Division of Motor Vehicles again, but a separate source of data from them, which is their crash database known by the acronym of VISION. And we have data for 2020 in hand for that as well. So I'll briefly describe the methodology that we follow in setting our safety targets in very a broad description. So as I said at the outset, the base of the target that we initially set is the trend line for 5-year rolling averages. And I'll explain in a picture in just a moment what that means. So in essence, we're using past performance to predict what next year's performance might be. That's the first step. What we do then is consider that target value that has been computed for the next year to determine if it's reasonable. And by reasonable, I mean, we look for a couple of different conditions. First of all, is the computed trend rising? Is it projecting a higher level of fatalities or serious injuries than we've had presently? Historically, we have not accepted this as the basis of a target because the underlying philosophy or motivation of our safety program is to drive these crashes down. We aren't amenable to setting a target that's higher than the current performance. A second condition that we look for in the category of reasonableness is if the computed trend is falling, which is a good thing, but maybe we think it's projected to be falling too steeply to be sustainable. And so in that case, we might moderate our chosen target a bit below what is to be less aggressive than what has been computed by the data. And then lastly, the third consideration as we evaluate the computed target value is that we would look at external factors and decide if there are any pending external factors that might lead us to have a more or less aggressive safety target. A couple of examples that I would give is if we knew that there was on the horizon perhaps an adult seatbelt law in the state. You could assume that once the seatbelt law came on the books, that safety performance on the highways would improve. So that might lead us to select or to adjust our target value to be a little bit more aggressive. On the other hand, if, for instance, if we had marijuana legalization that was on the horizon, that could be expected to worsen the safety performance on our highways. So that might lead us to have a less optimistic target value for safety. Thus far, in the several years that I've been involved in the target setting process, we haven't yet had occasion to use this third evaluation of our safety targets. We really haven't had any broad changes to our safety, to the external factors to highway safety that have risen to the level of needed to be factored into our target values. So in the target setting process, we coordinate with a number of different parties who have a stake in this process. First of all, we work very closely with our federal partners at the Federal Highway Administration, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and then also the Office of Highway Safety at the Department of Safety. So the Office of Highway Safety, in parallel with what the DOT is doing, they are filing their annual report on their performance to NHTSA. As I'm developing the targets, I also review with my HSIP committee. Again, it's the Highway Safety Improvement Program. My committee is overseen by a group of folks, partly from the DOT, from different disciplines, but also from regional planning commissions and a couple of communities. So it's a pretty wide variety of expertise on this committee. And I work with them and review the proposed targets with this committee. I also review the draft target values with the MPOs and the RPCs. And I do this via the Partnering for Performance New Hampshire team, which assembles these groups plus the Federal Highway Administration to talk about issues of common concern. And so targets are one reason that I visit this committee annually. And then finally, I meet with my commissioner's office to make sure that that they agree with the targets that I'm setting in cooperation with my partners that I've just described. So I'll proceed into an explanation of the 5 performance measure targets that I described earlier. The first one being the target for fatalities. So each of the 5 graphs shows different information, but with similar colors and different types of data that are presented. So first of all, the blue line that winds its way up and down across the screen shows the annual figure of fatalities in the state of New Hampshire for each year. So you can see in 2020, there were 104, 2019, 100, 2018, 147, and so on. See the number varies widely from year to year. Because of that annual variation, which is very common throughout the states, what we commonly do, the best practice is that we convert these annual figures into 5-year averages. And that's what's shown with the red line. So each dot on the red line indicates the average of the current year and the 4 preceding years. So it's an average of 5 years. And by averaging these 5 years together, it smooths out that line. It attenuates the annual variation. And that red line is what we use to compute the trend. So that trend line is computed from the 5-year rolling averages that's shown as the green dashed line. And that's what is then projected 1 year into the future to show what is calculated as the potential target value. So in this case, you'll recognize that the computed green trend line for fatalities showed a slightly rising trend, slightly higher value in 2022 than was experienced in 2020. So again, that's one of the conditions that we look for. And historically, we have not been willing to accept that as our target value. And so what I've shown for fatalities that we propose to set a target value equivalent to the 2020 5-year average. So we projected that forward as our 2022 target. Similarly now, if you look at the fatality rate, so this is reported per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. So this is dividing our number of fatalities by a traffic volume that accounts for all the travel on the state's highways. So again, if you look at the blue line, that shows the annual value of fatality rate from year to year. Then the red line indicates the 5-year averages. So again, that smooths out that up and down annual performance. From the red line, we compute the green line, project that to next year. And in this case, the trend that was computed was a slightly declining trend that appeared to be a reasonable figure. And so that, in this case, was selected as our target value. And I'd point out, it's kind of a, I guess it's not surprising, but you can see that we report this figure to 3 decimal places. And it's been asked within my agency, can't you round this to 1 or 2 decimal places? Well, in fact, in the law that says that we must report fatality rates, it also specifies we have to report them to 3 decimal places. So there you go. That's why we do it the way we do it sometimes. Looking now at serious injuries. So again, the blue line shows the annual performance. So in this most recent year, 2020, we had 504 serious injuries, 485 the year before, 451 the year before, and so on. We use the blue data to compute the red line, which is the 5-year averages. From that, we compute the trend, and then we consider if it's reasonable. Now, in this case, this is a little bit of an oddity that took more investigation on the DOT's part and on the part of our partners, because what we found was, despite the fact that it looks like a reasonable target value, the 439.4, what we found is that looking at the recent 2 or 3 years of performance and what that might mean to 5-year averages looking into the future a bit, we found that if we had chosen 439.4 as our target, we would have had to have substantially improved safety performance for serious injury crashes than we have seen in recent years. We would have needed a couple of years of really superior performance that we felt was unsustainable. And so this is a case where that consideration of, is it reasonable? Is that trend sustainable? We felt that it was not. And so that we've reduced our targets a bit. We've selected the 2020 5-year average as our target value for 2022. And very similar for the serious injury rate. And you'll note that the 2020 value really ticked up quite a lot. And many, or even most, perhaps even all states across the country are seeing this as well, where both in the number of fatalities and the number of serious injuries, despite the fact that last year with COVID, traffic volumes were way down, the traffic crashes and the traffic fatalities are pretty consistent with other years. And so, as you might imagine, if you look at the mathematics for computing the serious injury rate, if the numerator of your fraction doesn't change, but the denominator reduces, the result increases greatly. And that's why we've seen such a big uptick in our serious injury rate for 2020. And so the same logic that I just described for the serious injury target on this slide applied here. And so we moderated what we selected as our target value from 3.206 to 3.506 as a more achievable value. And then finally, the 5th performance measure has to do with non-motorized users of the roadways. And so this is the sum, the blue line shows the sum of fatalities and serious injuries for both bicyclists and pedestrians. And you can see that from year to year, those values have very strongly been subsiding, which is a great thing to see. So not only the annual figures, but the 5-year averages have declined, and the computed trend line has declined as well. In this case, the computed trend value of 38.0, it appeared to be a very achievable number based on the recent performance that we've seen. And so we adopted that as our target value. So finally, each year, as I said, both the Department of Transportation and the Department of Safety report these performance measures and our safety targets to the federal government. The Department of Safety does so on July 1st of every year with their highway safety plan. The DOT follows on August 31st. So next week we'll be providing or reporting these target values to the Federal Highway Administration. And then the MPOs follow 180 days later. So in that case, it's February 27th of next year. And with regard to the MPOs, they can either adopt the targets that have been computed and generated by the DOT, or they can go their own route and they can compute targets of their own for their particular region. So with that, I know I covered a lot of territory in a short amount of time, so I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay.
It's a building shot here. When you assess fatalities, is that a death on the scene of the accident, or can it be a death that occurs at a hospital after the accident?
That's a very good question, right? And a fatality is considered any death that happens at the scene of the crash or within 30 days.
Okay, so then it's reasonable to expect that the quality and performance of EMTs could have a large impact on what's called a survival rate.
That's a very good observation. That's right.
Do you measure that at all?
Not directly in these target values, but our guiding document with our HSIP is what's known as the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And one of the 4 cornerstones of that plan is emergency medical services. So certainly they're one of the many stakeholders that have a hand to play in highway safety.
The reason I ask to some degree is if we play that up, is there a way that we could increase federal funding to support growth and perhaps better training facilities, whatever, of the various communities, EMTs around the state as well as the region?
Right, that does stand to reason. And again, the EMS Bureau from the Department of Safety, they're an active participant in our strategic highway safety plan. So the DOT's role within that plan is infrastructure. So we are strictly with the engineering side of the 4 pillars of that plan. But so I don't know the details of how the EMS folks use that strategic highway safety plan to leverage funding, but it seems like a good place to start.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We have Tammy, if you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, my name is Tammy Zamoyski with the Queen City Bike Collective, and I'm really happy to see the downward trend in the non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. I was just wondering if you identified any factors that might have contributed to that downward trend so we can continue to support those.
That's a great question. We work very closely with the Department of Safety, and it relates not only to this one graph here, but the one that I showed earlier with fatalities. And it's very difficult, and it's been very elusive to try to put our finger on what is the reason for crashes to either jump or to fall in a particular year. We work with our stakeholders to try to understand that, but very often we don't truly understand why the trends are going in a certain direction. I mean, so much of what we do in the field of engineering, when we're working on infrastructure improvements, it's really the tip of the iceberg on safety issues on the highways. So much of it is human behavior, lack of seatbelts, lack of helmets, speeding, impairment, distraction, you name it. So really enforcement is the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, every year during the year, and especially at the end of the year, when we know what our annual tally has been in these different categories, we work with the Department of Safety to try to understand why we're seeing the numbers that we're seeing. And so often we really can't come to a really defensible answer.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering if maybe you had seen any like Vision Zero policies that were really efficient, or an uptick in complete streets practices, or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, a question for me. This is Sylvia over in the commission office. Just wondering if DOT has done a study on these injuries and fatalities about the road, and if there's any similarity, like if there's an understanding if the roadway that this occurrence has happened on, if there's fog lines or lane identifiers or not. So for example, recently we've been talking about safety with senior drivers and how important lane designation is. So I'm wondering if there's an understanding about the circumstances where these injuries and fatalities are occurring. We know more information about the road and what type of lane designation there is.
Right. That's a very good question, Sylvia. And so what we generally see within the state of New Hampshire, and this is talking statewide, roughly 70% of our fatalities year after year are related to lane departures. So people driving out of the lane, either off the road into the roadside or into opposing traffic, 70% each year. But the challenge is that these crashes happen in random and unpredictable locations. And so a big focus of our HSIP is really to try to address these crashes. And then some of the typical safety countermeasures that we pursue in that direction include having appropriate warning signs on highways, having appropriate guardrails, but also having appropriate markings. And so one development thus far, it's only reached our interstates and freeways, is what's known as durable pavement markings. And you'll see some of this on the newly reconstructed 93 from Salem up to Manchester. We've just finished installing durable pavement markings, which it's a new material and new method of installation. What it entails is having a slight depression milled into the pavement. Within the depression, we put in a thicker paint material that's able to hold and retain a better reflective element. And what that means is those markings are not only more durable, they'll last several years instead of a few months as our paint markings generally do. But in wet conditions, those reflective elements within that stronger, more durable paint are reflective even when it's wet. So it's a great improvement, a great safety benefit to keep people in their lanes. The downside is it's fairly costly, but on the other side of the equation, it is also effective safety treatment. Whether those types of markings ever get beyond our freeways and interstates, I don't know. Again, it is a resource challenge to try to expand the use of those, but having brighter and more lasting pavement markings, I think that's a really effective treatment for drivers of any age.
Thank you. Right, moving on. Well, I guess we're done with the MPO. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Peter?
You can stop sharing, Mike, and thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
So we just raise our hands, or do we need to?
I think just call to order.
It's called to order the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. First action is the meeting minutes of July 27th, 2021. Who approved? Second.
And second, Bill Jean. And I think we need to do roll call. Sounds good. Roll call, so we'll go around. Hold on, I need my cheat sheets. All right, Auburn, we have Paula Martzel.
Yes.
Thank you. Bedford, Bill DeShaco.
Here, yes.
Bill Jean.
Present, yes.
And on the virtually, we have Barbara Salvatore, I think. Unless Barbara left. Looks like Barbara had to leave. Okay. Not for the commission meeting. Al Hall from Candia?
Yes.
From Chester, Andrew Haddock?
Yes.
And we have Deb Munson, please, still online.
Yes, I think I was supposed to abstain because I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay, thanks, Deb. Deerfield, Bob Cody?
Abstain.
Thank you. Derry, we have Jeff Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. Tripp,
Yes.
and John O'Connor online.
Yes.
Thanks, John. Francistown, we have Alfred Eisenberg.
Yes.
Thank you, Alfred. From Goffstown, we have in the room David Pierce.
Yes.
From Londonderry, in the room, we have Suzanne Brunel.
Yes.
And online, we have Brian Battaglia,
Yes.
Deb Levins,
Yes.
Arthur Rugg,
Yes.
thanks, Art, and Martin Trugas.
Abstain.
Thanks, Martin. In the room from Manchester, we have Peter Capano.
Yes.
From New Boston, in the room, Mark Sunin.
Abstain.
From Wyndham, in the room, we have Peter Griffin.
Yes.
And online, John Hills.
Yes.
Thanks, John. Okay.
Okay, new business. Sylvia, you're going to cover the updated bylaws.
I am. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, can everyone see? And hopefully you're not going to get car sick as I scroll. Thanks for giggling. So the bylaws, we had a subcommittee. Everyone see the screen? Online virtually, just one yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So I think we had a few goals when we decided to tackle this. And when I say we, I'm talking about Mark Sunin, Bill Herman, Linda, Nate, and myself. And I think initially this came up because of our new hybrid meetings and our virtual component. And Barbara Salvatore's back. And so that was one of the elements we wanted to include in the bylaws. Another one was to ensure that we identified the MPO aspect. You read this right now, the present bylaws, you'll notice we don't specify the MPO. And so we wanted to specify references and add any details that were specific to MPO membership and quorum that are a little bit different than the commission. We also wanted to, it'd been 7 years since the last update, and there were several changes, some to references for us. Raymond had dropped out and went to Rockingham Planning Commission, so that needed updating. So we sort of did an overview of the whole thing. We wanted to clarify sections as needed and remove any redundancies and just look at the organization in general. So I'm going to slowly but surely go through this document and just highlight some of the more important aspects. So here under purpose, you can see the status as an MPO, some of the references and important wording. And of course, Nate supplied us with a lot of this wording. Membership, I mentioned Raymond had moved to Rockingham. So we took that out and talked a little bit about MPO membership, because that also includes others outside our immediate commission, including allowances for Allenstown, Bow, and Pembroke, and of course, DOT and MTA. There's also some non-voting representation on the MPO that was acknowledged. We wanted to update our own commission membership according to the RSA. So this is almost the same wording, but there's slight variations. So we looked at the RSA and we updated that accordingly. And we wanted to make sure it was clear that the variety of memberships, and so some of the wording was reviewed, some removed. And also some of the wording, parts of this was in different sections, and we made sure it was organized in a clearer way. So the powers, duties, and requirements. First, looking at the powers of the commission, the board of commissioners, again, an MPO reference. Expectations of commissioners, when it was requirements of commissioners, it was sort of alluded that if someone didn't come, I would call you and hunt you down. That's not what we wanted. So instead, we just encouraged attendance because it's so important, and your vote and your attendance is critical to all the work we do. Voting, we wanted to clarify that as well. There was this allowance in the past for a special circumstance. We don't think that that was legal, so that was removed. And also clarifying that voting by proxy was not allowed. Wanted to look at the officers and make sure this was clear. Again, looking at a reference to here again, the MPO. Little updates, like instead of 13 communities or 14. So that had been missed at the last update, which I think should have been 15, but anyway. So just updating various sections here, making them clear, election of officers, how that works, terms, the duties of the different officers, some specifics here on the treasurer. So all this was just, we wanted to make sure it was very clear. If there's, for example, here, if the executive director, that position is vacant, that the executive committee could appoint an interim executive director. The duties of the executive director. And you can see a lot of this wording is still here. It was just organized, not as clearly as I think we have it now. The allowance here of combining our meetings, but keeping minutes separate. And here's that electronic participation. So this is completely new and reference to 91A. And just as we do, you know, we go around and you identify yourself and the vote by roll call. So some specifics there, the meeting notice. And this is one other item, quorum. And in the past, for example, with 14 communities, we would need 8 communities present for the commission. And so one of the ideas we had, and that's spelled out. I believe, here we go. The MPO is 8 voting member entities, and just as a reminder, it's not just the communities, but also MTA and DOT. Where with the commission in this paragraph, we need 8 commissioners, but what we thought from 7 dues-paying member communities. And as you know, we have sometimes 2 commissioners from the same community coming to the meeting and being present. So we thought that was a reasonable allowance to make sure we got to a quorum. Today, we have over 8 communities. I think we have 9. But in future, we would be able to have 8 commissioners from 7 of the dues paying municipalities. Some of the information we didn't think was vital, such as this order of business. Whereas we wanted to be clearer about the committees, the 3 standing committees being the executive committee, the personnel committee, and the budget committee. Also of note is the building committee and we need to create a new joint loss management committee. We'll talk about that after we get through this. More on the administration of the executive committee. Meetings. Powers and duties. And then reviewing again power of duties of the other standing committees, being the personnel committee. And the budget committee. Here again, keeping most of the same wording, but this was an update where you know, the Office of State Planning has changed so many names. So, but we did catch the most recent change here. I believe that's the most exciting thing. Just a few more items, making note in the public involvement, making note of social media outlets, indemnification, new section. And that is it. Any questions?
Suzanne Burnett from London. So this reads that if you're an alternate, that you're voting, the chair is going to note that in the meeting.
Yes.
Okay. So I am an alternate. So for example, today, all the members of Londonderry are virtual, except for me. So I would not be voting. Is that correct?
I think the chair would make that determination up front. And
Well,
since we,
the way the new bylaws read, I think she would not be able to vote if all the other members are here, right?
Well-
If I can make an interpretation.
Yep.
Since the policy says that the people who are physically present make up the quorum, you are as physically present representing Londonderry to make up the quorum. So you can vote for that motion to allow the virtual to participate. As soon as, if they have the full complement of allowed representatives, then you can't vote any further in the meeting. You vote yourself out of office.
And I, as an attorney, would agree with your.
but let me just, some communities, most of the communities, either you have 2 commissioners that are voting or even 3 commissioners. So I think Londonderry is one where you have, Linda, how many are regular members? And I can probably tell you that.
It's actually going up because we just got the 2020 census figures and Londonderry crossed the threshold of 25,000. As a result, the town of Londonderry is going to be entitled to an additional seat on the Regional Planning Commission and MPO as a result of that's codified in statute. Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring that question. We just literally found like 2 days ago when we got the census numbers, whatever it was, that Londonderry crossed the threshold. So.
Did any other towns change? Either increase or
They all change, but in terms of crossing that threshold, I think Londonderry is the only one that crossed the threshold at that time.
Does that mean that the commission has another commissioner or
Yes.
is there one? Okay.
It means the commission has another commissioner. Yeah.
So for example, right now, Londonderry, it takes two. You have one open regular member. Here's, as you said, your two alternates. And then 3 more regular members. So, you know, today you all, let's see, Deb Levins, Arthur Rugg, and Brian Battaglia would probably be your voting members. And then as Nate said, you gained another one, so that you would have a slugfest between you and Martin. So it's not just
No.
one voting member.
So Sylvia, a couple of years ago, I took the place of Sharon Carson as a full voting member. So that list is slightly off.
Okay, and that's a reason why I want to review this list with everyone, is to verify, and I'm gonna share it again, so let's
Yeah,
take a look at this list right now.
Well, I think Arthur would know.
So you're saying this, you should not have an alt, that you
Right,
should
I
be a
started out as an alternative, but then when Sharon Carson stepped off the board, I was the next in line.
Okay, so we'll do as a regular member.
So,
And- oh,
so Sylvia, it's Art Rugg. Marty is a full member. I'm a full member. Deb Levins is a full member. Brian is a alternate, and Suzanne is an alternate. Okay, that was from I think last year. The planning board had reviewed what we needed for membership because we've been, and I think we have there's an open alternate position. We've been advertising the last year and haven't got anyone yet. So.
Okay, let's ask the other communities, Bedford. Is there, because we have an open regular member, has Bill or Barbara or Brian Lord gone up to the open regular member that we're aware of?
Bill's the regular.
I was appointed as a regular.
Okay. Thank you. Candia, we already know we have one opening. We have the 2 from Chester. We have a lot of openings now from Derry. So I'm going to guess, Richard Tripp, you must be a regular member now?
Well, I believe when I was appointed a regular member.
Okay.
That was probably 4 years ago. So I saw in the bylaws that you said you have to get a piece of paper from the town says to when you're elected or selected. Is that correct?
The town is supposed to notify us when they appoint or reappoint a member. And sometimes they remember to do that, sometimes they don't. So we can certainly check our records as well.
So I'll check with Derry to make sure that they send you a piece of paper.
Sure. Yeah, we need to know. And then Francestown also has an open regular member. So I'm wondering, Al, is that going to be you?
I don't think so at the moment. I don't know what the. I don't know
It
if they're
doesn't
going
have to
find
be that
something or
you're
not.
part of the executive committee, but although that's also open. All right, so something to check into. And then Goffstown, Dave, I've got, an open regular member, but.
The planning board nominated a person to fill the vacancy. And the select board was going to validate that last night. I didn't follow the select board's.
Okay, so stay tuned.
So it's forthcoming.
Town of Hooksett is definitely down regular members. And yeah, we need to straighten that out. Manchester has, Peter, I think I don't know if one of the alternates from Manchester might step into.
Yeah, Kevin May, I have
reached out to staff at the planning board, at the planning department, and we're in discussions about getting that slot filled.
Okay, great. New Boston's all set, Ware, Wyndham. Yeah, so everybody else is all set there. I'll stop sharing. Anyway, we're back to the bylaws. So the executive committee is going to look at final version, and then you'll vote on that at the September meeting. And if anyone has any hiccups that you want to let us know about, just please let us know. Peter.
Sylvia, you mentioned about a newly established law committee.
Yes.
Joint loss.
Joint
the
law.
Joint loss. It's a safety committee.
Oh, okay, joint loss, excuse me.
Loss.
LOSS, yeah.
I have a question about the bylaws, Sylvia. The quorum business.
Yeah.
Eight members from at least seven different communities constitute a quorum.
That's what we propose.
Yeah. Why? I don't quite get it. Why not just 7 from 7? What's magical about
It
8?
has to be 51%, so we need that one more person.
So why waive the community aspect of it? Why make it 7 communities and not 8 from 8?
Why not make it 8 communities is your question?
Yes.
At the time, I think, and the rest of the committee can chime in, but at the time, our concern was it was difficult to get a quorum in the room. And, you know, depending on the meeting, it's just that difficult. And obviously today I feel rich because I have 9 communities, but there are times we are getting our, you know, as whatever happens with COVID and the pandemic and things get worse, you know, you may not want to come here. And it may be that the emergency declaration won't happen. So a pizza may not be a great draw for you. And you might think, oh, I'd prefer to worry about my health and be virtual.
Then as a follow-up, then why not just 8 members? And why bother with 7 communities? Why not just 8 members?
I can answer that. Us smaller communities were concerned that 5 members from Manchester and 5 members from from Londonderry could make up the entire quorum. That's not acceptable.
So we thought 8 members from 7 communities was reasonable because as you see,
balance.
You have voted here today to allow the virtual communities. And we've gained by doing that, we've gained Francestown, who else is just virtual? I think just Francestown. But that really helps.
Maybe you should have your people.
Plus the other commissioners on here. So we thought it was a reasonable.
Okay, thank you.
Compromise. Yeah. Peter.
Sylvia, it's a little bit like the Electoral College. I mean, we don't want those California state towns like Londonderry or Manchester, you know, taking over. Exactly.
Linda, don't put that in the meeting minutes. Track that. Any question from those virtual attendees? Any thoughts on the bylaws? I know this was edge of your seat kind of stuff, so.
So these will be voted on the next meeting?
Voted in September, yeah. So we will send you out, and it's in the bylaws, I believe 20 days prior to the meeting, you have to have that version. And Barbara.
Let me just, okay. I noticed in the part under the staffing where the executive committee can appoint the executive director, the section about allowing the executive committee to dismiss another staff member was removed. Could you explain a little bit more about that? Because in the absence of having an executive director, if something were to happen, I don't understand why you would remove that power from the executive committee.
Good question. Well, first of all, my recommendation initially was that we don't just talk about firing people, which doesn't happen too often. We also talk about hiring people. And so that's when we move from that conversation to appointing at least a temporary executive director. Any other thoughts that I'm missing here?
No, that's what we discussed.
Yeah.
And that appointee could also come. Quicker.
Yeah.
So I think.
Bill broke up. I couldn't understand him.
So we discussed this at great length, Barbara. And what the thought was that with the executive committee having the ability to immediately appoint an interim executive director, it could mean that one of the people from the executive committee became that director to handle critical decisions in a quick time, that we basically covered that without making it too complicated. And we did not want to get the executive committee involved in essentially operational decisions on a constant basis. So that was our thought of doing it that way, and I think that's appropriate and in keeping with how most municipalities also.
Thanks, Bill. Any other questions from the group virtually? Okay.
All right. So last item is the slate of the new officers and standing committees that will also be voted on in September.
Right. So the slate of new officers is for the chairman, Peter Griffin from Wyndham, vice chair, Mark Sunin from Boston, treasurer, David Pierce from Goffstown, and secretary, Arthur Rugg from Londonderry. And I don't know if we actually need a motion to accept that committee or that slate, or is that we do that at the so that's the slate, and that's the September meeting that will get voted in.
So, one point of order, now would be the time when you can open up to any other people who want to be nominated or want to nominate someone else, one of those roles. Just,
Jeff?
Sure. Do we have any other nominations for officers for chair, vice chair, secretary, or treasurer? Anything online?
No, so I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand online, but so there's no surprises there. We do have 3 standing committees. The personnel committee will now be Peter Griffin, Bill Herman, and Barbara Griffin. The budget committee, David Pierce, Jeff Moulton, Peter Griffin, and Bill Herman. And then the building committee, Dave Pierce, Ray Clement, and Jennifer Badney. If anyone wants to be part of those 3, and we add to, but also remember we'll have the joint loss committee, and we'll be needing some volunteers for that, perhaps, but that still gets defined later on when we look at the personnel plan. So stay tuned on that.
Anyone else wish to join the committees?
Not seeing anyone raise their hand virtually, and we're all set here.
All right, then I think that wraps it up.
Sylvia,
We have John O'Connor.
Sylvia, may I take a moment to respond to Commissioner Griffin's question regarding exit 4A? So very briefly, first of all, Peter, I did not run for state rep, so I'm no longer a state rep. But as chairman of the Dairy Planning Board, I do follow exit 4A very closely. The bill you're referring to with Senator Birdsell and Senator Carson is SB 116. It came out of the Senate with a timetable to follow the 10-year plan, 23-1. It went to the House, and while it was in the Public Works Committee, what happened there, Victoria Shane, the commissioner, came down and explained what the issue was regarding the timetable. So the Public Works Committee went and put that in as a retained bill. So it will either have to have a report out by November or it will die on the floor, which I think that's what's going to happen. For everybody else's information, DOT has an unbelievable website, which is www.I93exit4a.com. And the most recent public works presentation was given to the governor and to the executive council, which approved all the funding on June 30th, 2021. So in that there's a presentation, there was a hearing, and then there's also the schedules in there. And then again, in the website, I won't take your time up, there's a wealth of information on there, and everything's moving forward in the explanation as to how the stages are going to be working, which is shovel on the ground, hopefully by January next year. So hopefully that answers your question, Peter.
John, thank you very much.
Thanks, John. One other thing, just under other business, we're still looking for nominations for the Clausen and Tethers Awards. I believe we've gotten one nomination for the Clausen, but the Tethers, remember, can be a local planner, a regional planner, or a state planner, but that is a professional planner. So if anyone has a nomination, please get that in to Linda. Thank you.
Any other business?
Move to adjourn.
Al, second?
Second.
Peter Capano.
All in
Thumbs up all
favor?
around?
All right, Kevin.
All right.
All right. Till next time, everyone. Thanks so much.